Greetings from the far side of the galaxy, I'm Fury, your host the most, back with the other half of this video. Things have kind of gotten a bit complicated. If you want the basic rundown of what we're doing, click here to watch part 1 and click here to watch part 2 while I pick up where we left off. The first world we'll be covering is Xanadu, the world based on Mongolian mythology and history. The exile of this world is Jamuka, the only friend of Xanadu's world representative, Temujin. Not just his friend, they were so close Jamuka was his blood brother. Despite how close they were, that didn't stop Jamuka from being exiled when Temujin killed him. We aren't quite sure what happened or what he did, but we do know that Jamuka betrayed Temujin. But that wasn't the problem, it was Jamuka's pride. He refused to forgive Temujin or join his horde, and that's what got him killed. And this gave Temujin trust issues that last till this day in Tokyo. Unsurprisingly, Jamuka is inspired by a real person of the same name. Supposedly, he became the blood brother of the real-life Temujin. Oh, by the way, Temujin is the name of Genghis Khan before he became Genghis Khan. By helping him save his wife after she got kidnapped, but Temujin did war with him once rebel Khans elected Jamuka as their leader. Did the same betrayal happen in HOUSAMO? No idea, but I'm moving on to the next world, Utopia, the world of the future. Utopia is a really weird world because we don't know who the exile is, but we do know their rule of rending. The futuristic world of Utopia fears one thing: the past. In a world where everyone is constantly racing ahead, to become obsolete and forgotten is something that they utterly cannot stand. But this unknown exile's rule of rending was to cut time, jumping to the future, ensuring that they were never left behind. Nomad and Algernon's own abilities are byproducts of Utopia trying to recreate this feat. Guessing the identity of this exile is a hard one because they were supposed to be a scientist who worked on a time machine. That is such a terribly broad category. For all we know, it could be from an H.G. Wells story or the Doctor from Back to the Future. Why don't you tell me your ideas in the comments while I move on? That's cause up next, or well, right now, is Uranus, the exile of Olympus. Our story begins at the literal beginning, with Uranus creating Ophion and then the two of them creating Olympus from her cosmic egg. The two ruled over the world of Olympus for a time and frequently fought when the latter's ego got too big. She's the one that knocked out his tooth, which eventually formed the pillar of their world. But Olympus is as Olympus does, and the two of them were eventually kicked out by their son Kronos and his wife Rhea, who was in turn kicked out by Zeus and the rest of the Olympians that rule today. Uranus had two artifacts, emphasis on the had part. One of them is the cosmic egg of her own creation, which could birth anything that existed in the world of Olympus, like Ophion and his younger self who now has the artifact. The other was passed down from her mother, Gaia, and Uranus in turn passed it down to her son, Kronos, and it was a scythe with its own rule of rending. Its ability was to cut bloodlines, which has to do with the way Olympus works. Olympus works on a hierarchy where the 12 Olympians stand at the top as perfect infallible creatures, as is their birthright. In that world, love and bonds only exist to extend that authority and to have children with that authority which is given by blood. But that scythe had the ability to do away with that concept entirely, severing any birthrights a person may have. Essentially, it's able to reduce a king to a peasant by cutting away their claim to a throne, or in the case of Olympus, their place in the hierarchy. It's also able to cut any abilities or curses granted by those the system gives authority to, like Hera's curse over Echo. Despite the dangers such an artifact posed to Olympus, Uranus was mostly left alone. We know at some point that Hephaestus was thrown out of Olympus, where Uranus found and raised them. He got his start in crafts by making jewelry for his mother out of seashells, and the beach from Virtual Summer Memory was based on the beach Hephaestus grew up on. We don't know why she got exiled. Maybe the Olympians were just tired of that scythe being in their world, but she was eventually thrown into the depths of Oceanus. Thus, Ophion swears revenge, Hephaestus joins the Olympians, blah blah blah, yada yada yada, we're now back where we are in the game. Getting into the myths, Uranus was an ocean titan, and she did rule Olympus alongside Ophion before being kicked out. Even the part about raising Hephaestus is true, but things get interesting when looking at her past. It's actually based on a modern interpretation by Robert Graves, which has Uranus as a creation goddess who creates Ophion, and then the two of them birth Olympus through an egg. Something that's true in HOUSAMO, down to Olympus being an egg and Ophion himself being a creation of the egg too. Real quick, remember to like and subscribe and donate to my Ko-fi and Patreon. Patreon supporters get early access to all of my videos and Patreon only Discord server. Now, back to show. The next world we're covering is Nirakanai, and would you believe we only got information about their exile in the Gangster Christmas event? All this info is pretty damn new. The world of Nirakanai revolves around its representative, the Sun King Tata. He loves all, and all love him. Okay, well, not really all. There was one person who did not love him, Kinemon, a god in their own right, but also a Miko. A shrine maiden in service of Tata, but despite literally being a worshipper, she was entirely uninterested in Tata. So he showered them with gifts and attention, but Kinemon did not reciprocate, looking gloomy until the end. Kinemon was the ones who exiled themselves, going into the abyss, which is presumably the sea, where Tata could not follow them. Tata wonders if the extra attention caused them to be scorned by the rest of the world, but he doesn't really know. Kinemon's and Tata's inspirations are complicated. They come from a variant of Shintoism practiced in the Ryukyu Islands, and Kinemon is one of, if not the, main god. And Tata himself comes from a regional folktale, but I'm honestly not sure. There's not a lot of information about Kinemon or Tata, so I'm pretty sure that Kinemon themselves were a god associated with Shrine Maidens, which is why they were one, and that the abyss is likely the ocean since that's where Kinemon was supposed to live. The next exile we're talking about is one I've been putting off because it's going to take so long. So long. It's Nuwa, the exile of Penglai. She's the sister of Fuji, the world representative. Fuji's whole shtick is his ability to predict the future using his Bagua board. He was good at it, so good that it would end up robbing his life of most enjoyment. He knew that the world would inevitably flood and that he and his sister would be the only ones to survive over and over and over and over and over again. And yet, the only thing he couldn't predict, the only thing to escape his Bagua board was his sister. She was capricious and mean, despising humanity and yet recreating it every time the world flooded. Getting on her hands and knees to fix Penglai's pillar whenever it broke, coming back muddy, bruised, and scratched time and time again. Fuji mostly left Nuwa to her own devices, but the two did spend some time together. They enjoyed long walks and played games together, although Nuwa hated Fuji's overbearing nature and the way he'd always swoop in at the last minute for the win. However, things do change once Emperor Zou enters the picture. After being so awestruck by her beauty, he ends up defacing a temple by writing a poem on the wall. And HOUSAMO is intentionally vague about what he did, but in the myth, it's a poem about, how much he wants to blow her back out. Nuwa, who is understandably pissed, responds with her sacred artifact. We actually get to see the artifact itself in the game. It's that red aurora thing behind Shenong. Its rule of rending was to cut the heavens, which is to say it predicted where war would happen. And the artifact could be used in two ways, actively and reactively. Shenong uses it reactively, letting it wave of its own volition so it can head out to battles and give aid. Since Emperor Zou pissed her off, Nuwa decided to use it actively, intentionally waving it around to forcefully predict where a war would happen. She even sent out one of her servants to cause more mayhem, and they went by many names, Tamamo no Mai, Lady Daiji, but we know her as Hakumen. Disguising herself as a courtesan, wooing kings and queens, and then leading countries into chaos. But for whatever reason, Nuwa herself was the one to give up the jig, throwing Hakumen to the proverbial wolves. We don't know why Nuwa betrayed Hakumen or if she even stopped her war before getting exiled. Going through the interpretations, Nuwa has a lot of thought put into her. The flooding of Penglai, the repair and recreation of humanity is something taken straight from the myths. Her decision to wage war on the world comes from the book The Investiture of the Gods, and Life Wonders has decided to give her actions the same name in-game. The next exile comes from the cold, frigid world of Comely Koten, and their name is Ainuraker, I think? Okay, give me a break. I could barely find any information on the exile at all, let alone how to pronounce their name. Either way, this is the exile that was raised by HOUSAMO's golden boy, Horikyu Kamui. We learned from Corpicure that they were likely a child of Kana Kamui. Okay, I know this is Dragon Maid, but this is the best image I can find on Google. Kana Kamui was the draconic god of thunder, thus making this exile part dragon, much like all the rest. Supposedly short in stature but large at heart, Horikyu raised this exile into a warrior before setting them loose into their cold, cold world. That has to do with the way Comely Koten works. It's a world where the young are nurtured and the old are nourishment. Great pains were taken to ensure that children got everything they needed, but the moment they got too old and became another mouth to feed, they were removed. Likely due to Comely Koten's rule of stasis, it has an immense propensity to spawn shadows. So Horikyu is supposed to pass down that gleaming blade artifact he has in his normal 5-star, which comes with its own rule of rending. It countered the very world of Comely Koten with its ability to cut stasis, a perfect counter for the shadows the world spawns. On their journey of cutting down shadows, we know they ran into Kimun Kamui, who like all things in the world, nurture the young. He desired to give the exile his pelt, but the young lad declined the offer, worrying that Kimun Kamui would get cold. However, Kimun Kamui has 2 identities, and of course, 2 roles. Kimun Kamui aids the young, but when Kamui removes the old. We know that the gleaming blade was returned to Horikyu, so we can only presume that that was the fight they lost. Doing the interpretations for Ainuraker is complicated. On one hand, they seem to be inspired by the protagonist of the story Koten Utani and the myth of Onya Kamui. The former is a coming-of-age tale about a boy reconnecting with his Ainu roots, and the latter is a myth about the supposed father of the Ainu people. The final exile we're finally covering is Yoshitsune from the land of Wa. Yoshitsune and his brother, the world's representative of the land of Wa, Yoritomo, were both military men, but they could not be more different. Yoritomo is a poor fighter, more of a politician than a warrior, making plans and strategizing safely from behind front lines. Yoshitsune, on the other hand, was a warrior. No matter the danger, he'd wade back through a pool of blood with the head of his older brother's enemy every time. And Yoritomo hated that because above all else, more than a politician or even a world representative, Yoritomo is a coward. Because Yoritomo and Yoshitsune were both Minamotos, they both had the same claim to the same political power. Quick side note, Shino's wife, Suihime, is either an ancestor or descendant of Yoshitsune, which is why the Akenshi want to serve the protag. The missions Yoritomo sent Yoshitsune on were suicide missions. His little brother was never supposed to come back, but he always did. Because Yoshitsune wasn't just skilled, he was the best swordsman in the land of Wa. Trained by a Tengu who is likely Hogan and then gifted the sword Hogan currently has, which comes with its own rule of rending. Its power is to cut distance, letting him and Hogan seemingly teleport, leaping great distances in an instant to cut enemies down. However, it also appears that the distance it can cut is also a metaphorical one. One of the ironclad rules of the land of Wa was good old-fashioned racism, where the majority oppresses the minority. Yoritomo's sword, his sacred artifact and symbol of office, states that it can not only appoint heroes, but his 5-star research file goes even further. Its power can identify Oni meant to be subjugated and cut them away from a world that needs to be stabilized. There's a reason Takemaru and Suzuka don't get homesick. Yet, Yoshitsune seems to be able to bridge that gap with Oni. His right-hand man was Benkei, better known in Tokyo as Oniwaka, an Oni that would literally die for his lord, because Yoshitsune would technically exile himself. Once Yoritomo finally said fuck it and sent his men after Yoshitsune, Oniwaka held them off alone on a single bridge. Even in death, his massive body remained standing up, which is actually the inspiration for Whitebeard's death in One Piece. Behind him, realizing his brother's desire, Yoshitsune simply committed seppuku, exiling himself through death. For the life of him, Yoritomo can't understand why, but even a demon like Mephistopheles can tell that all Yoshitsune wanted to do was help his brother. HOUSAMO's interpretation of Yoshitsune and Yoritomo is fairly accurate to the embellished tales because the two of them were real people. The details of his actual death are complicated and mired in medieval Japanese politics that I do not understand, so I'm not even going to try. Just know that Yoritomo didn't directly send his men after Yoshitsune, rather he convinced a friend to betray Yoshitsune, and thus the story plays out as normal. And with that, we are finally done with all of the exiles. This entire series took nearly 40 minutes counting all 3 parts? Actually no, cause I'm making a 4th part addressing the protagonists themselves and the way all these exiles add up. It's going to be a giant headache, so don't expect a video immediately after this one. I have other projects I really want to get to doing. Before we go, we still have to do Patreon shoutouts. For 3 stars, we have special thanks to 87 Werehog, Deku, Zora Chao, Choron, Garyon Lefay, Dragon King Yara, and Kayun. For 4 stars, we have Miki Moon and Unknown RC, the Time Thief Double Barrel. And for our Super D-Tuper special 5-star shoutouts, we have... First, Vanilla Flower, the Ebon Angel of the Burning Abyss. Then, Poor Mage, the Lord of the Heavenly Prison. Next, Sky King 64, the Lord of the Lair. And finally, Mahagasaur, the Iceblade Dragon. Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe and donate to my Ko-fi and Patreon. As always, this is Rose Fury signing out.